She gave him 12 years. She gave him her grief, her silence, her body through 2 pregnancies that ended in nothing but empty nurseries and a husband who held her hand at the hospital and cried. And she believed every single tear. But at 5:12 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in March, a small wooden fox no bigger than her fist fell out of Lucien DeMarco's coat pocket and landed on their kitchen floor, and everything she thought she knew about her life cracked straight down the middle. If you've ever trusted someone completely, if you've ever loved a person who was building a second life behind your back while you mourned alone, this story is for you. Watch until the end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Double it. The fox was hand-carved. That was the first thing Evelyn noticed. She was standing at the kitchen island in her bare feet, still in the oversized gray t-shirt she'd fallen asleep in, waiting for the coffee to finish because sleep had stopped coming easily around 3 a.m. and she'd given up fighting it. The overhead lights were off. Only the under-cabinet strips were on, throwing a low amber glow across the white marble countertop, and she was staring at nothing in particular when she heard Lucien's key in the front door. She didn't move toward him. She hadn't done that in a long time. She heard him set down his briefcase in the foyer, heard the soft drag of his coat coming off his shoulders, heard the particular silence he carried with him when he came home late, that careful, deliberate quiet of a man who had spent years learning how to enter a room without disturbing anything. She used to think that was consideration. She understood now it was practice. He appeared in the kitchen doorway. 6'2", dark suit, the tie loosened but not removed because Lucien DeMarco did not fully loosen anything. His jaw carried 2 days of stubble that he maintained with the same precision he applied to everything else. He was 51 years old, and he looked like a man who had never once been afraid of anything, which was either the most attractive or the most terrifying quality a person could possess. And after 12 years of marriage, Evelyn still wasn't entirely sure which one it was. "You're up," he said. "Coffee," she said. That was the full extent of it. That was marriage at 5 a.m. after a decade of erosion. He moved to the refrigerator, opened it, stood there looking at nothing. The same way she had been looking at nothing, and she watched him from across the island and noticed what she always noticed when he came home past midnight. The smell. Not cologne. Cologne was what he wore when he left the house. What clung to him now was something softer, something floral and warm, the kind of perfume that came from proximity rather than a passing stranger, the kind that embedded itself in wool and silk through hours of contact rather than minutes. She said nothing about it. She had said nothing about it for longer than she could accurately remember. He closed the refrigerator without taking anything, turned, picked up his coat from where he draped it over the back of one of the bar stools, and that was when it happened. The coat shifted, the left pocket swung forward with the weight of something inside it, and the something came loose and fell, and the sound it made on the kitchen floor was a small, definitive knock, the sound of solid wood hitting marble. They both looked down at it. The fox was maybe 4 inches tall, hand-carved from a pale reddish wood, sanded smooth with tiny painted details, white-tipped ears, a delicate brush of gold along the tail. It was the kind of toy that someone had spent real time on, not a factory piece, not something you grabbed off a shelf. The craftsmanship was careful and specific in the way that things made for a particular child always were, carrying the weight of intention in every curve. Evelyn stared at it for 3 full seconds before she crouched down and picked it up. She turned it over in her hands. On the flat underside of the base, burned into the wood in small, neat letters, was a registration number. She knew that format. She knew it the way she knew her own handwriting, because she had spent the better part of 6 years helping design the system that created it. HH 2019047, Haven House, registration year 2019, item number 447 in the artisan toy program her mother had launched before she died, and that Evelyn had spent years expanding into something that actually functioned, a program that commissioned handmade toys from local craftspeople and distributed them through the Foundation's Family Assistance Network to children in verified need. She stood up slowly. Lucien was watching her with an expression she couldn't immediately read, which was unusual because she had spent 12 years learning to read him. His face was very still. Not relaxed, still. There was a difference, and she knew it. "Where did this come from?" she asked. A beat. Just one, but she felt it like a footstep on a frozen lake. "Client's kid," he said. "I was at a dinner. The toy fell out of someone's bag. I picked it up to return it." She looked at the fox. She looked at him. "It's from Haven House," she said. "I don't know where it's from, Evelyn. It's a toy." "It has a registration number," she said. "A registration number from the artisan program." She held it up so he could see the base. "I helped design this system. I know what these numbers mean." Something moved behind his eyes. Not guilt exactly. Lucian DeMarco did not do guilt the way ordinary people did. It was more like recalibration, the almost imperceptible shift of a man adjusting his strategy in real time. "Then it came from a client whose kid is in your program," he said. "I don't know every detail of where my client's children get their toys, Ev. I just picked it up off the floor. It was smooth. It was entirely plausible. It was the kind of answer a man gave when he had spent years being very good at answering questions." She set the fox down on the counter between them. "I'll log it in the morning," she said. "Return it through the proper channels." He looked at the fox for a moment. Then he picked it up and slipped it back into his coat pocket. "I'll handle it," he said. "I'll get it back to the right people." She watched him take it. She watched his hand close around it and disappear it into his pocket, with the ease of a man who was very accustomed to making things disappear. And she felt something settle in her chest. Not rage, not yet, but something older and quieter. Something that had been sitting there waiting for the right shape to fill it. She turned back to the coffee. "There's enough for 2 cups," she said. "I'm going to bed," he said. She heard him pick up his coat. Heard his footsteps cross the kitchen and climb the stairs. Heard, finally, the soft click of the bedroom door. She poured her coffee. She stood in the amber light. She thought about the registration number HH2019047, which meant the toy had been commissioned in 2019 and distributed to a child verified as qualifying for the Haven House Family Assistance Program, which meant somewhere in the Foundation's database there was a name attached to that number, a child's name and a family record, and an address and an assessment of financial need. She drank her coffee. She did not sleep. By 6:30 in the morning, Lucian was gone again. She heard him leave while she was still sitting at the kitchen island with her second cup, heard the front door close with the same deliberate quietness it had opened with, and she sat there for another full minute before she got up, walked to the home office on the second floor, sat down in front of her laptop, and opened the Haven House administrative portal. She typed in her credentials. She navigated to the Artisan Toy Program Registry. She entered the number, 2019-0447. The record loaded in under 3 seconds. Item: hand-carved wooden fox, red cedar, commissioned from artisan Marcus Webb, completed October 2019. Distributed November 14th, 2019. Recipient file, CF-2019-0112. She clicked through to the recipient file. Child: Ethan Cross. Date of birth, March 3rd, 2019. Age at distribution, 8 months. She stared at the name. 8 months old when the toy was distributed, which meant the toy had been commissioned before the child was even born, likely during the pregnancy, which meant someone had applied to the program, been assessed, been approved, and received a hand-commissioned artisan toy for a child who wasn't yet in the world. She scrolled to the guardian information. Primary guardian, Vivian Cross. Evelyn knew that name. She knew it the way you knew the names of people who existed in the peripheral vision of your marriage. Present, but not looked at directly. There, but cataloged under a category that didn't require close examination. Vivian Cross was Lucian's executive assistant. She had held the position for 7 years. She was 34 years old, efficient and precise, and largely invisible in the way that truly effective assistants were. Present at every event Evelyn had attended on Lucian's arm, present in every meeting summary Lucian brought home, present as a name on emails and a voice on speakerphone calls, and an occasional face at the DeMarco Group's annual functions. Evelyn sat with that for a moment. Sat with it the way you sat with something that had not yet become real, something that was still in the process of assembling itself into a shape you recognized. Ethan Cross. Born March 2019, which meant Vivian Cross had been pregnant in the summer of 2018. Evelyn thought about the summer of 2018. She had been pregnant that summer too. 14 weeks along, the second time, the second pregnancy that had carried just far enough for hope to take root before it was taken away. She had been in bed for 3 days after, in the dark. And Lucien had been there, Schott. She remembered him there, remembered his hands and his voice and the weight of him sitting on the edge of the bed saying the things that people said, the careful, adequate things. And she had believed that he was grieving alongside her. She had believed that. She pulled up the Haven House financial records for CF-2019-0112. The file showed consistent benefits from November 2019 through the present date. Quarterly distributions from the Family Assistance Program, subsidized enrollment in the Foundation's child care network, 3 rounds of emergency housing support in 2020 and 2021, access to the medical referral program. The total value of assistance received over the period of approximately 4 years came to just over $68,000. She sat back in her chair. She thought about what she knew about Vivian Cross's professional salary, executive assistant to the CEO of the DeMarco Group, which was a position that paid well, comfortably well, not $68,000 in charitable aid well. She thought about what she knew about the DeMarco Group's revenue. She thought about what she knew, what the people in Lucien's world knew, what the people in certain other parts of New York knew, what was not spoken aloud at dinner parties or in board meetings, but was understood the way weather was understood, as a condition of the environment, about where the real money came from. The foundations and the subsidiaries and the holding companies were legitimate. The DeMarco Group was legitimate. The buildings were legitimate. The hotels were legitimate. The restaurants were legitimate. The other operations were not. She had known that going in. She had been 27 years old, and she had known exactly who Lucien DeMarco was when she married him, and she had made the calculation that most people in her position made, that the life and the man and the particular security of existing in his world were worth the things she would choose not to examine too closely. She was 39 now, and she was examining. She picked up her phone. She called the Haven House administrative director, a woman named Cora Banks, who had worked with the foundation since Evelyn's mother founded it, and who knew the records better than anyone. "Cora," Evelyn said when she answered, "I need you to pull a file for me. Recipient CF-2019-0112. I want a full audit of the qualifying assessment, everything that was used to establish eligibility." A pause. "Of course. Can I ask what prompted this?" "I'm doing a routine review," Evelyn said. "The Artisan Toy Program. I want to make sure our verification process is solid." "I'll have it ready by 9, Cora said. Evelyn thanked her and ended the call. She sat for another moment looking at the screen. Then she navigated to the DeMarco Group Employee Records portal, which she had access to through her seat on the board, and she pulled up Vivian Cross's compensation history. She looked at the numbers for a long time. Then she opened a new browser tab and began to search. It took her 4 hours. She worked methodically and quietly, the way she had learned to work on foundation matters, following threads carefully, cross-referencing, not jumping to conclusions before the evidence assembled itself completely. She was meticulous about this because her mother had taught her that the most dangerous thing a person could do was decide what the story was before they had all the facts. And her mother had been right about most things. By 10:30 in the morning, she had the following. Vivian Cross's compensation for the past 7 years. Generous, above market, but not exceptional for the role. No significant assets in public records. A rental apartment in the West 50s, appropriate for the income. A child enrolled in a private school in the same neighborhood whose tuition ran to approximately $42,000 annually, which was not covered by any scholarship or assistance program, and which was not consistent with the financial profile of a woman who qualified for Haven House support at any point in the last 4 years. There was a gap, a significant one. And in Evelyn's experience, gaps of that size in a financial profile had sources, and the sources were not accidental. She thought about Lucien, about the particular way he had looked at the fox on the kitchen floor, about the speed with which he had picked it up and pocketed it, about the answer he had given her, smooth, plausible, entirely prepared, the answer of a man who had thought about what he would say if something like this ever happened. She thought about 7 years of Vivian Cross's name moving through the periphery of her marriage. She thought about March 2019. A boy born in March 2019, while she was in the early weeks of the pregnancy she would lose in July. She sat very still in her office chair. Outside the window, the city was fully awake now, bright and indifferent and moving at its usual speed, and she looked at it for a long time before she reached across the desk and picked up her phone again. She called her attorney. His name was Franklin Marsh, and he had been her family's lawyer since before she was born, and she trusted him in the specific way that you trusted someone who had known you your whole life and had never once given you a reason not to. "Evelyn," he said, "this is unexpected on a Wednesday morning." "I need to talk to you," she said. "Not on the phone. In person. Today, if possible." A pause. "That serious?" "Yes," she said. 2:00, he said. "I'll clear my afternoon." She thanked him. She ended the call. She sat for another moment in the quiet of the office, and then she got up and went to the window and stood there looking down at the street and thought about Lucien DeMarco, who was somewhere in this city right now doing the things he did, moving through his world with the absolute confidence of a man who had never been caught. And she thought about what it felt like to have spent 12 years believing that his world and her world were the same world. They were not. She had known that in the abstract way that you knew things you chose not to examine. What she understood now, with the specific precision of a woman who had just spent 4 hours following a thread to its source, was that the distance between his world and hers was not a matter of different priorities or different schedules, or the ordinary erosions of a long marriage. It was a child, 5 years old, named Ethan, with a hand-carved wooden fox and a mother who had been quietly receiving charitable support from a foundation that Evelyn ran, while simultaneously receiving private support from the man Evelyn was married to, and no one had considered that these two facts might eventually intersect in the same kitchen at 5 in the morning. She pressed her fingers against the cool glass of the window. She was not crying. She noticed this about herself with something that was not quite surprise. She had expected something more dramatic from this moment, something that required crying, but what she felt instead was a kind of terrible clarity, the sensation of things that had been slightly out of focus for a very long time, finally sharpening to their actual edges. She went back to her desk. She opened a new document and began to make a list of what she knew and what she needed to confirm and what she needed to do, in that order, and she worked through the afternoon with the same focused attention she brought to everything that mattered. She did not tell Lucien. Not that day, not the next day. She was deliberate about this. Franklin Marsh listened to everything she laid out on Wednesday afternoon and sat with it for a long time before he spoke. He was 67 years old, with white hair and the measured expression of a man who had heard extraordinary things in ordinary offices for 4 decades. "You're certain about the registration number," he said. "I designed the system," she said, "and the financial records. I have them here." She set the printed pages on his desk. He put on his reading glasses and looked at them for a while. "The question of the Foundation's resources being misused," he said finally, "is going to require a formal audit. You can initiate that through the board without Lucien's involvement. Your role as executive director gives you that authority independently." "I know," she said. "That's not the primary question right now." He looked at her over his glasses. "The primary question," she said, "is what I do with the rest of it." He was quiet for a moment. "There's also the question," he said carefully, "of the Bright Tomorrow Gala." She had not thought about the gala specifically until that moment. The Bright Tomorrow Charity Gala was 3 weeks away, Haven House's largest annual fundraiser, the one that brought together the legitimate and the influential, the visible face of everything the DeMarco family name was supposed to represent in public life. Lucien chaired the event committee. She co-chaired. It was one of the last remaining things they did together that felt, from the outside, like a marriage. "What about it?" she said. Franklin set down the papers. He folded his hands on the desk. "I've been hearing things," he said. "In the last few weeks, nothing I can point to directly, but there are indications that Lucien may have plans for that event that go beyond the standard program." "What kind of plans?" "The kind," he said slowly, "that would involve introducing certain people publicly, in a context that would establish their relationship to him and to the Foundation's legacy in a way that's very difficult to walk back." Evelyn looked at him. She thought about Vivian Cross, about a 5-year-old boy with a wooden fox, about what it would mean for a man like Lucien DeMarco to bring that child into a room full of donors and cameras and the particular people who moved between his legitimate world and his other one, to present the boy as something, to frame the presence of that family within the scaffolding of a charity event that bore her mother's vision. "He's going to use the gala," she said. It wasn't a question. "I believe so," Franklin said. "I believe he's planning to use it to legitimize something that he currently cannot legitimize through other channels. And I believe he's planning to do it in a way that implicates the Foundation's resources and your family's name." She sat with that. Outside Franklin's office, the city continued at its speed, indifferent as always, and she sat in the leather chair across from her family's lawyer and understood that the thing she was deciding in this room was not just about her marriage. It was about her mother's name and the work her mother had done, and the 70 or so children currently receiving support from Haven House, whose access to those resources could be compromised by the association with a fraud investigation. She thought about Ethan Cross, 5 years old, who had done nothing wrong, who had a wooden fox he was probably missing right now. "Franklin," she said, "I need 3 weeks." He nodded slowly. "And I need it to be airtight," she said. "Everything documented, the foundation records, the financial discrepancy, the qualifying assessment, all of it. I need it so solid that there's nothing he can reframe or redirect or make disappear." "That's what I do," Franklin said. She stood up. She buttoned her coat. She picked up her bag. "One more thing," she said. "Yes?" "The boy," she said. "Whatever happens, the boy doesn't get caught in this." Franklin looked at her for a moment. "Understood," he said. She walked out of his office and into the afternoon. She had a dinner with Lucien that night. A gallery opening, the kind of public appearance that their marriage still generated on schedule, regardless of what happened privately. And she went home and dressed carefully, and stood at the bathroom mirror, and looked at herself for a long time before going downstairs. Lucien was already in the foyer, jacket on, checking his phone. He looked up when she appeared at the top of the stairs. Something passed over his face. Appreciation, possibly, or its performance, she could no longer tell. "You look good," he said. "Thank you," she said. She descended the stairs. She took his offered arm. They walked out the front door together into the cold evening air and got into the waiting car and sat side by side in the dark interior of the back seat. And she looked out the window at the city passing by, and she thought about a small wooden fox sitting in her husband's coat pocket, and about a 5-year-old boy named Ethan, who had no idea what his existence was about to mean for a room full of people 3 weeks from now. She thought about what Lucien was planning. She thought about what she was planning. The car moved through the streets of New York. Beside her, Lucien made a phone call. Quiet, brief, the particular professional tone that gave nothing away. She watched a woman walking a dog on the sidewalk, moving through a pool of streetlight. And she thought that the most dangerous thing about Lucien DeMarco had never been the world he operated in or the things he was capable of. The most dangerous thing about him was that he had always believed she wasn't paying attention. He was still on the phone when the car stopped in front of the gallery. He ended the call, turned to her with the expression he wore for public occasions, warm, composed, present. "Ready?" he said. She looked at him. Her husband of 12 years, the man who had held her hand in 2 hospital rooms, the man who had a son he had never mentioned, living in an apartment she had indirectly helped fund, carrying a toy that her mother's foundation had commissioned. "Always," she said. She took his arm and they walked into the light together. But for the first time in 12 years, she was not walking beside him. She was already 3 steps ahead. 3 weeks was not a long time. 3 weeks was 21 days of sleeping in the same bed as a man who didn't know you knew, of passing him the coffee carafe at breakfast and asking about his schedule and saying goodnight at appropriate hours, of performing a marriage with the precision of someone who had finally understood that performance was all it had ever been. Evelyn was good at it. That surprised her a little. How good she was at it. She had always considered herself a poor liar, the kind of person whose face gave things away. But she discovered in those first days after Franklin's office that there was a difference between lying and simply not volunteering the truth. She wasn't lying to Lucien. She was just no longer offering him the interior of her mind, which she realized, with a dull and specific pain, was something she had probably stopped doing years ago without noticing. The audit request went through the Haven House board on Thursday morning. She framed it as a routine internal review, quarterly verification of the Family Assistance Program's qualifying assessments, something the Foundation's bylaws technically required and had not been rigorously enforced in several years. 3 of the 5 board members approved it without question. The 4th asked a clarifying question about scope. The 5th, a man named Gerald Pruitt, who had been placed on the board at Lucian's recommendation 4 years ago, asked whether this was related to any specific concern. Routine, Evelyn said. We're strengthening our verification protocols before the gala. It's good governance. Gerald Pruitt said he supposed that was reasonable. The audit team began work Friday. Cora Banks called Evelyn on Saturday morning with a voice that carried the careful neutrality of someone who had found something and was not yet sure how to present it. The qualifying assessment for CF-2019-0112, Cora said. I've been through it twice. And a pause. The income documentation submitted at the time of application lists the guardian's annual income as $31,000. Freelance administrative work. Inconsistent hours. Evelyn said nothing. The thing is, Cora said, I pulled the tax records we were provided as supporting documentation, and they're from 2018, which is the year before the application was filed. But the compensation records for Vivian Cross at the DeMarco Group show she was earning $78,000 annually by 2019, and that increased to $94,000 by 2020. So the income documentation was outdated, Evelyn said. It was more than outdated, Cora said. The freelance income listed on the application, the $31,000, that appears to correspond to a period before she joined the DeMarco Group full-time. Whoever completed the application used old documentation that was no longer accurate at the time of filing. Who processed the application? Evelyn asked. Another pause, longer this time. It was processed by our previous intake coordinator, Cora said, Margaret Diaz. She left the foundation in 2020. Do we know why she left? Her file says voluntary resignation, Cora said. But Evelyn, her departure package was significantly above standard. It was approved by the executive committee. Who chaired the executive committee in 2020? Cora didn't answer immediately. She didn't need to. Get me everything, Evelyn said. Margaret Diaz's personnel file, the departure package, the intake coordinator's processing notes for that application. All of it. I'll have it by Monday, Cora said. Evelyn thanked her and set the phone down on the kitchen counter and stood there in the morning quiet of the house, both hands flat on the cold marble, and breathed through her nose for a while. It was worse than she'd thought. Not just an affair, not just a hidden child, but a deliberate, constructed cover, a pathway built through her mother's foundation. Someone paid to process a fraudulent application and then paid again to leave quietly, and all of it executed with the same methodical precision that Lucien applied to every operation he ran. She thought about her mother, about Margaret Ashcroft, who had spent the last decade of her life building Haven House from a small community program into something that genuinely changed the material circumstances of families who had nowhere else to turn, who had died believing that the foundation was protected, who had trusted her daughter to protect it. Evelyn's hands curled against the marble. She was still standing there when she heard Lucien's footsteps on the stairs. He appeared in the kitchen dressed for the day. Saturday, casual, which for Lucien meant dark trousers and a fine knit sweater. The ease of a man whose version of relaxed still cost more than most people's formal. He moved to the coffee machine without looking at her and poured himself a cup and stood with his back to her for a moment before turning. You're quiet this morning, he said. I'm always quiet in the morning, she said. Quieter than usual. She picked up her own cup and drank from it and looked at him over the rim. She had become very good at this in the past week. The direct look that gave nothing away, that read as the ordinary mild distance of a marriage in its second decade. I have foundation work, she said. Gala prep. He nodded, looked at his phone. I have a lunch. He glanced up. Something passed over his face. The same barely there recalibration she had seen the morning the fox fell. The same micro-adjustment of a man who was always taking the temperature of the room. You're sure you're all right, he said. Not quite a question. I'm fine, Lucien. He watched her for another moment. Then he nodded and looked back at his phone, and the conversation ended the way most of their conversations ended. Not with resolution, but with the mutual agreement to let a thing remain at its surface. She thought, you taught me that. You taught me how to let things stay on the surface. And now you can't read whether I've gone under or not, because you built me a face I can wear in front of you. She thought it clearly and calmly and finished her coffee. He left for his lunch at 12:15. She watched the car pull away from the window of the second-floor office and then sat down at her desk and called Franklin Marsh. "The intake coordinator was paid off," she said when he answered. A silence. "You're certain?" "The departure package is documented. I'll have the files Monday. It's enough." "Evelyn." His voice was measured, but she could hear something underneath it. "This moves the situation from personal to institutional. Fraud involving a charitable foundation is a different category of exposure." "I know what category it is," she said. "Have you thought about how you want to proceed at the gala? Because if what I've been hearing is accurate, if he intends to use that event the way I think he does, then the timing of how you move is everything." She had been thinking about it. She had been thinking about almost nothing else. "I need to know exactly what he's planning," she said. "I need to know the program, who's presenting, what's being announced, where Vivian Cross and the child fit into the evening structure." "That's going to require someone on the inside," Franklin said. "I'm the co-chair," she said. "I'm on the inside." She ended the call and opened the gala planning files. She had co-chaired this event for 8 consecutive years. She knew its architecture completely, the timing of the program, the placement of speakers, the media positioning, the donor seating arrangements. She had always handled the foundation's portion of the evening, while Lucien managed the corporate and community relations side. They had operated in parallel tracks that converged for the actual event, and she had considered this an efficient division of labor. She understood now that she had been managed, that the parallel tracks had been kept parallel deliberately, that her portion of the event had been the visible scaffolding while his portion was the mechanism underneath it. She went through the planning documents line by line. She was looking for additions, for things that had been inserted in recent weeks, and it didn't take her long to find them. There was a segment in the second half of the program, listed simply as Community Stories in the running order, that had been added to the schedule 3 weeks ago. It had been submitted by Lucien's office, designated as a personal presentation, and described in the planning notes as a reflection on the Foundation's impact on New York families. It was allocated 12 minutes. There was a note in the margin of the planning document in the handwriting of Lucien's event coordinator, confirmed with L. Family attendance, 2 adults plus child, backstage from 7 p.m., 12 minutes. A family. Backstage from 7. She sat back in her chair. She thought about what 12 minutes looked like on a stage in front of 400 people. Donors, politicians, reporters, and the particular individuals from certain parts of New York's power structure who attended this event every year and understood exactly what the DeMarco name represented. She thought about what it meant for a man in Lucien's position to stand on that stage with a woman and a child and frame them within the story of a charitable foundation that his wife ran in her mother's name. He was going to use Haven House to legitimize them. He was going to wrap his hidden family in the language of community impact and charitable hope, and stand in the light of her mother's legacy and make it mean something different than it was. And then there would be photographs. There would always be photographs. And once the photographs existed of Lucien DeMarco at the Haven House Bright Tomorrow Gala, with Vivian Cross and a small boy who carried his features in the particular way that children carried their fathers, those photographs would exist in the world permanently, and the story that surrounded them could be shaped and shaped again until it became whatever Lucien needed it to be. She understood what he was doing. She understood the precision of it, the long game of it, the way it turned her own work and her mother's name into instruments of his architecture. She also understood that he had miscalculated, because he still believed she wasn't paying attention. The next 10 days moved with a particular quality that she would remember later as very sharp and very quiet, like the air before a storm that you could feel but not yet hear. She attended the gala planning meetings. She sat across tables from Lucien, coordinator, and her own, and made decisions about centerpieces and donor acknowledgments and the order of the silent auction items, and she did it with complete presence while underneath she was working. She met with Franklin 3 more times. She met once with the Foundation's outside counsel, a woman named Dr. Patricia Osei, who specialized in nonprofit law and who reviewed the audit findings with the expression of someone carefully not showing how serious she found them. "The fraudulent qualifying assessment alone is significant," Patricia said. "The induced departure of the processing coordinator, if that's what the documentation shows, moves this into a different category." "It shows that," Evelyn said. "The departure package was 4 times the standard amount, and was approved without a formal vote of the full board. Who authorized it? The executive committee, which Lucien chaired. Patricia looked at her for a long moment. The exposure here is not just to him, she said carefully. If this comes out in an uncontrolled way, the foundation takes damage too. Donor confidence, regulatory scrutiny, these things have momentum once they start. I know, Evelyn said. That's why the documentation has to be complete before anything moves. I need everything airtight. How much time do you have? 10 days, Evelyn said. Patricia nodded slowly. Then we work fast. It was during this period, on a Tuesday evening, that Vivian Cross called her. Evelyn was in the car on her way back from Franklin's office when her phone showed the name. She stared at it for 2 full rings. Then she answered. Vivian, she said. A silence on the other end, then, Mrs. DeMarco. The voice was careful, composed, the professional voice of a woman who had spent years learning to manage difficult situations without showing the difficulty. I wasn't expecting this call, Evelyn said. She kept her own voice even. I imagine not. A pause. I want to talk to you, not on the phone, in person. Evelyn looked out the window at the evening city. About what? You know what? Vivian said quietly. Evelyn considered this. She thought about what it meant that Vivian was calling her, what had prompted it, whether Lucien knew. She thought about the particular courage or desperation it required for a woman in Vivian's position to make this call. Thursday, Evelyn said. 11 a.m. The cafe on West 54th, the one across from the Hilton. Do you know it? Yes, Vivian said. Come alone, Evelyn said. Of course, Vivian said. The call ended. Evelyn sat with the phone in her lap for the rest of the ride and thought about what Vivian Cross wanted her to know and what she was prepared to hear. Vivian was already there when Evelyn arrived on Thursday. A corner table, her hands around a coffee cup. Her posture, the careful uprightness of someone who had spent the morning deciding how to sit in this particular chair. She was 34 and looked it in the way that people looked their age when they were tired. The fine lines around her eyes more visible without the professional context that Evelyn had always seen her in. She was dressed simply. No jewelry except a small watch. She looked, in this moment, nothing like the efficient professional presence that had moved through the edge of Evelyn's life for 7 years, and everything like a woman who had been carrying something very heavy for a long time. Evelyn sat down across from her. They looked at each other. There was a moment that held a lot of things without either of them naming any of them. I didn't know, Vivian said, about the foundation, the application. He handled it. He told me there was a program, that Ethan qualified, that he'd taken care of the paperwork. I didn't ask questions I should have asked. Okay, Evelyn said. I'm not asking you to believe that excuses anything. I don't, Evelyn said. Vivian's jaw tightened slightly. She looked down at her coffee. He told me you two had an arrangement, that your marriage was, that it had been effectively over for years, that you both understood that. Evelyn looked at her steadily. She thought about 2 hospital rooms, about hands held, about tears that she had believed were real. He told you that, she said. I know how that sounds, Vivian said. Do you? Vivian looked up. Her eyes were steady and very tired. He told me the same thing every year, that he was going to resolve things, that he was waiting for the right moment, that it was complicated. She paused. I believed him. For 5 years I believed him. Evelyn said nothing. She waited. The gala, Vivian said. He told me that it was going to be a public acknowledgement, a way of bringing things into the open. He framed it as the right thing, the honest thing, finally doing the thing he should have done years ago. She stopped. Her hands tightened around the cup. He told Ethan we were going to a special party, that his father was going to introduce him to some important people. Ethan he's been so excited. The words landed somewhere in Evelyn's chest. She kept her face steady. He's 5, Evelyn said. He's 5, Vivian said. And he doesn't know what any of this is. He just knows his father told him they were going somewhere special together. Her voice fractured slightly on the last word. She pressed her mouth together. I found out last week what the gala actually was, what foundation it was tied to. I started looking, and I found your name everywhere. The executive director, the co-chair, your family's name on the building." She looked at Evelyn directly. "He was going to walk us into your event, your mother's foundation, and let whatever happened, happen." Her voice had gone flat and controlled in the way that voices went when the emotion behind them was too large for the available space. "I don't know if he thought you wouldn't be there. I don't know if he thought you'd already know. I don't know what he thought, and I've stopped trying to understand what he thinks." The cafe moved around them. The ordinary sounds of other people's mornings, coffee orders and quiet conversations and someone laughing at another table. Evelyn looked at Vivian Cross and thought about what it cost a person to make the call she had made on Tuesday night. About what it meant to sit in this chair and say these things. "The foundation records," Evelyn said. "The qualifying assessment. The intake coordinator who processed the application and then left. I need you to tell me everything you know about that." Vivian nodded. She had known this was coming. "He introduced me to a woman," she said. "Margaret. In late 2019 when I was applying, he said she was a contact that she could help navigate the process. I met her once. She walked me through the application, told me what documentation to provide." She paused. "The income documentation she used. I didn't see it before it was filed. I provided what she asked for and she handled the rest." "Did he tell you what documentation she was using?" "No," Vivian said. "He told me it was handled. I didn't look at it." Evelyn nodded slowly. "I'll need you to put that in writing," Evelyn said. "A signed statement. What he told you, what you knew, what you didn't know. My attorney will contact you." Vivian looked at her. Something moved in her face. Is there legal exposure for me?" "I don't know yet," Evelyn said honestly. "That depends on what the full audit shows about what you knew and when. But I'll tell you this. The people who have the most exposure in this are the people who deliberately constructed the fraud, not the people who were handed false paperwork and told not to look at it." Vivian absorbed that. "What happens at the gala?" she asked. Evelyn looked at her. "You're not going to the gala," she said. "Neither is Ethan." Something in Vivian's expression shifted. Relief, and something harder underneath it. Something that looked like the final dissolution of a story she had been telling herself for 5 years. "He's going to be furious," she said. "Yes," Evelyn said. "He is." They sat with that for a moment. "Evelyn," Vivian said. It was the first time she had used her first name, and it landed differently than the formal address, carried a different weight. "I'm sorry, I know it's not enough, but I am." Evelyn looked at the woman across the table. She thought about everything she could say. She thought about 2 hospital rooms and 5 years of a child's life that had run parallel to her own grief and everything that meant and didn't mean. "Take care of your son," Evelyn said. "That's what matters right now." She paid for her coffee and left. She was in the car heading back across the city when her phone rang. It was Lu Shen's name on the screen. She answered on the second ring, the same way she always answered. "Hey," she said. "Where are you?" His voice was even, neutral, the voice he used when he was taking the temperature of something. "Just finished a coffee meeting," she said. "Foundation donor. Why?" A pause that lasted just slightly longer than a normal pause. "Nothing," he said. "Just checking in. Dinner tonight?" "Of course," she said. 7, he said. "I'll make a reservation." "Perfect," she said. She ended the call. Her hands were completely steady on the phone. She looked at them for a moment, the steadiness of them, the absence of trembling. And then she looked out the window at the city and understood that something had shifted in the last hour that could not be unshifted. Vivian had told him, or he had found out another way. It didn't matter which. What mattered was the pause. What mattered was the checking in, the dinner reservation, the particular neutrality of a voice that was calibrating. He knew something had changed. He didn't know what. And he had 3 days before the gala to find out. She thought about Ethan Cross, 5 years old, who had been told he was going to a special party where his father would introduce him to important people, who was probably, right now, in an apartment across the city, excited in the uncomplicated way that 5-year-olds were excited about things. She thought about what happened to that excitement when the party didn't happen the way anyone had planned. She thought about what happened to children who got caught between the gravity of things that adults had broken. Her phone buzzed. A text from Franklin Marsh. "Documents ready. Can you come in tomorrow morning? She typed back, 8 a.m. She put the phone in her bag. She looked out at the city moving past the window, the ordinary afternoon of it. The people on the sidewalks who were carrying their own specific weights through the specific grid of their own lives. And she thought about the gala 2 days from now, and about a man who was sitting somewhere in this city recalculating. She thought, 3 days, Lucien, you have 3 days. And for the first time since the morning the fox had fallen on the kitchen floor, she felt something that was not grief and not anger, but something colder and more purposeful than either. She was ready. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, sitting in the back of that car watching the city, was that Lucien DeMarco had spent the last 48 hours making his own preparations, and that he had not spent 20 years building an empire by waiting for other people to make the first move. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer it. She answered it. Mrs. DeMarco, said a voice she didn't recognize, male, quiet, the particular flatness of someone delivering a message rather than having a conversation. Mr. DeMarco asked me to let you know that the gala program has been updated. The Community Stories segment has been moved to the opening of the evening, 8 p.m. sharp. The call ended before she could respond. She stared at the phone in her hand. 8 p.m. The opening of the evening, before the audit findings could be formally presented, before Franklin's documents could be introduced through the board, before anything she had spent 3 weeks preparing could be deployed in the sequence she had planned. He knew. Not everything, but enough. Enough to move. She had 8 p.m. She said it aloud in the back of the car, just the number and the time, the way you said something when you needed to hear it outside your own head to understand what it meant. 8 p.m. sharp. The opening of the evening. She had planned for 9:15. The board presentation was scheduled for 9:15, after the dinner service, after the formal donor acknowledgments, at the point in the program when the room was settled and attentive and the cameras were positioned for the foundation segment. Franklin's documents were organized for 9:15. Patricia Osei was arriving at 9. The 2 board members she had quietly briefed, not Gerald Pruitt, never Pruitt, were prepared for 9:15. He had moved the segment 75 minutes earlier. She pulled up Franklin's number. He answered on the first ring, which meant he had been waiting. I know, he said before she could speak. How long have you known? 20 minutes. My contact at the venue called me. Can we move? She said. Can we push the board presentation earlier? Patricia is in Philadelphia until 6:30. The documents are at my office. Even if I messenger them to the venue right now. Franklin, Evelyn, listen to me. His voice was steady in the way that voices were steady when the person speaking had already done the calculation and accepted the result. He moved first. That's what it is. The question now is not whether your plan executes on schedule. The question is what you do when the segment starts at 8 and you're standing in that room. She looked out the window. The city was doing its evening thing, the lights coming on, the traffic thickening, the particular density of a Manhattan night assembling itself block by block. What I do, she said. You have the audit summary, Franklin said. The core findings. You have that on your phone right now. That's not the same as the full documentation. No, he said. It's not. But it's something. And Evelyn, there's another factor. She waited. Gerald Pruitt, Franklin said. He called the venue this afternoon and added himself to the backstage access list. He's going to be there early. Pruitt. Lucien's man on the board, the one who had asked the clarifying question about the audit scope and been satisfied by the word routine. He's going to try to shut down the audit, she said. He's going to try to make it not matter, Franklin said. If Lucien gets on that stage at 8 o'clock with Vivian and the boy, in front of 400 people and every camera in that room, the story changes. The audit becomes a response to what he establishes, instead of the other way around. He controls the narrative and you're playing defense for the rest of it. She understood this. She had understood it the moment the call ended. Get Patricia on the phone, she said. I don't care if she's on a train. Get her on the phone and have her send me everything electronically. Signed, dated, everything. I'll work with what I have. And Vivian, Franklin said. Evelyn had already thought about Vivian, had been thinking about her since the moment the unknown voice said 8 p.m., and something cold had settled into the center of her chest. She needs to keep Ethan away from that venue tonight, Evelyn said. Have you called her? I'm calling her next. Evelyn. Franklin paused. Be careful tonight. Not careful like you've been careful for 3 weeks. Careful like he is going to know by the time that room fills up that something is wrong. And Lucian DeMarco, when he knows something is wrong, is not a man who waits to see what happens next. I know who he is, she said. I know you do, Franklin said. I just want to make sure you know who he is tonight specifically. She thanked him and ended the call and immediately dialed Vivian. It rang 4 times. 5. She was preparing for voicemail when Vivian picked up, and the quality of her voice in the first syllable told Evelyn everything before she said a word. He called me, Vivian said, low, tight, the sound of someone standing in a very small space trying not to be heard. When? An hour ago. He said the plan had changed. He said we needed to be at the venue by 7:30, not 8. He said, a pause, a breath that was not quite steady. He said Ethan needed to wear the blue blazer. He knows Ethan has a blue blazer because he bought it for him last Christmas, and Ethan has worn it exactly once. Vivian, Evelyn said, don't go. Silence. He knows I met with you, Vivian said. He didn't say it directly, but I could hear it. The way he said the plan had changed, like the original plan had included something that no longer applied, like he'd adjusted for a variable. The variable is me, Evelyn said. He knows I know. He doesn't know how much or what I'm going to do with it, but he knows enough to move the timeline. Don't take Ethan to that venue. Another silence, longer. Evelyn could hear something in the background, a small voice, a child's voice, asking something about the blue blazer, asking if it was time to go yet. She heard Vivian's breath catch. He's been ready since 4 o'clock, Vivian said very quietly. He put the blazer on himself. He's been sitting on the couch waiting. Evelyn closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Then she opened them. I know, she said. I know what that costs. But I need you to trust me. Keep him home tonight. And if Lucian calls again, tell him Ethan is sick, Evelyn said. Tell him whatever you need to tell him, but don't go to that venue. A long pause. Okay, Vivian said, very quiet. Okay. The call ended. Evelyn was at the venue by 6:45. The Whitmore Grand's main ballroom was already in the controlled chaos of final setup. Caterers moving in precise lines, the AV team running cable checks along the edges of the room, floral arrangements being positioned on the circular tables with the specific anxiety of people who understood that rich people noticed when flowers were 2 inches off center. The stage at the far end of the room was lit for the pre-check, bright and flat, 2 podiums, and a projected logo for the Bright Tomorrow Gala floating above the scrim. She walked through it with the ease of a woman who had co-chaired this event 8 times, nodding to the staff she knew, making the small, precise adjustments that a co-chair was expected to make, and all the while she was mapping the room. Exits, camera positions, the backstage corridor that ran behind the stage through the left wing, the green room where speakers gathered before going on. Gerald Pruitt was in the green room. She found him there at 7:05, standing with a glass of water and his phone. The practiced ease of a man who believed he was where power was. He was 63, broad, the kind of heavy set that came from decades of good restaurants, and he looked at her when she walked in with an expression that was doing a great deal of work to appear unconcerned. Evelyn, he said, I didn't know you'd be back here so early. I'm the co-chair, Gerald, she said pleasantly. I'm always back here early. Of course. He glanced at his phone, set it face down on the side table. I wanted to talk to you, actually, about the audit. Oh? I've been thinking about the timing, he said. Presenting audit findings at the gala. I'm not sure that's the right venue. It could create concern among donors that isn't. I haven't announced any intention to present audit findings at the gala, Evelyn said. He stopped. She looked at him with the pleasant, neutral expression she had perfected over the past 3 weeks. The audit is an internal board matter, she said. It'll be addressed at the next board meeting in the appropriate format. Was there something else you needed? He looked at her for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes. The recalculation, the same one she'd seen in Luciation's face, a genetic trait of men who spent their lives in rooms where information was leverage. No, he said. That's all. Enjoy the evening, Gerald, she said. She left the green room and walked directly to the venue coordinator, a young woman named Sasha, who had worked every Haven House event for the past 4 years and who Evelyn trusted completely. The community stories segment, Evelyn said quietly. If at any point tonight I need to adjust the timing or the format, I need you to be able to move fast. Sasha looked at her. She was 29 and perceptive in the way that people were perceptive when their job required reading rooms for a living. How fast? Sasha said. Immediately, Evelyn said. Sasha nodded once. I'll stay on comms all night. Evelyn's phone buzzed. Patricia Osei. Document sent. Signed audit summary. Qualifying assessment fraud documentation. Intake coordinator departure package. All time stamped. Check your email. She checked her email. Everything was there. She forwarded it to the 2 board members she had briefed and typed. Tonight. Be ready. She put the phone in her clutch and walked to the entrance of the ballroom and stood there for a moment looking at the room. The tables filling now, the first guests arriving, the soft roar of 400 people's worth of evening beginning to build. She was scanning the room when she saw Lucian, and he was near the bar, already in conversation with 2 men she recognized. One was a city councilman. The other was a man whose name she didn't know, but whose presence at events like this she had always understood. In the peripheral way, she understood many things about Lucian's world. He was in black tie, fully composed, the version of him that the room saw and that the room responded to. The ease, the weight, the particular gravity of a man who controlled the temperature of spaces simply by existing in them. He hadn't seen her yet. She watched him for a moment. 12 years. She thought about it standing there. Not sentimentally, not with grief exactly, but with the specific clear-eyed attention of someone who was looking at a thing for what it actually was rather than what they had needed it to be. Then he turned his head and saw her. The moment lasted perhaps 2 seconds. They were across a crowded ballroom from each other, and the distance meant that whatever passed between them was invisible to everyone around them. But she felt it the way she had learned to feel the things that moved in the spaces beneath his surface. The slight adjustment of his posture, the fractional narrowing of his focus, the recalibration. He raised his glass slightly, the ordinary gesture of a husband acknowledging his wife across a room. She nodded back. She moved away from the entrance and found her seat assignment. Co-chair, front table, positioned with clear sightlines to the stage and to the room's main entrance. And she sat down and placed her clutch on the table in front of her and breathed steadily and waited. At 7:47, something happened that she had not planned for. She heard it before she saw it. A small disturbance near the main entrance. A ripple in the room's noise. The particular shift in ambient sound that meant something unexpected was moving through a space. She turned in her chair. Vivian Cross was walking into the ballroom. She was dressed simply, a dark dress, and she was holding the hand of a small boy in a blue blazer, whose other hand was clutching a hand-carved wooden fox. Evelyn stood up from her chair. Her body moved before her mind fully completed the instruction. She started across the room. She was navigating between tables, moving with the controlled speed of someone who was not running but was covering ground fast. And she watched Vivian scanning the room with the expression of a woman who had made a decision that she was no longer sure was right. And she watched the boy, Ethan, 5 years old, blue blazer, wooden fox, looking around the ballroom with the open-faced wonder of a child at a very large party. She was 12 feet away from them when she heard it. "Daddy!" The word cut through the ballroom noise with the particular clarity that children's voices had in large rooms, high and pure and carrying in a way that adult voices didn't, traveling over the dinner conversation and the music and the ambient roar of 400 people and arriving everywhere at once. Ethan had seen Lucy, and the boy pulled free of Vivian's hand and ran. He ran the way 5-year-olds ran. Full commitment, arms slightly out, the wooden fox clutched in one fist, completely indifferent to the tables and chairs and adults in his path, angled across the ballroom floor with the absolute certainty of a child who had spotted the person he most wanted to reach and was going to reach them. Lucian was midway through a sentence with the councilman when the boy hit him at full speed, arms wrapping around his legs, face tilted up. "Daddy, I'm here. Mom said we couldn't come, but then she changed her mind. We're here. The sentence Lucian had been in the middle of died. The councilman looked down at the child, looked up at Lucien. The man next to the councilman looked at the child, looked at Lucien. The people at the nearest table looked. The people at the table beyond them looked. The looking spread outward through the room with the speed of something that could not be stopped once it began, the way fire moved when the conditions were right. And Evelyn stood in the middle of it and watched Lucien DeMarco, the man who had spent 20 years constructing an image of absolute control, look down at the 5-year-old boy wrapped around his legs and understand in real time that every wall he had built had just come down at once. His face did something she had never seen it do. It simply had nothing. No composure, no recalibration, no smooth adjustment of strategy. For 5 full seconds, in front of everyone in that room, his face was just a man's face with nothing on it, and it was the most honest she had ever seen him look, and it was terrible. Vivian was crossing the room. Her face was white. She reached for Ethan's shoulder. "Ethan, sweetheart." "But Mom, that's Daddy." "I know, baby. He said we were coming." Evelyn moved. She covered the remaining distance and reached Vivian's side and put her hand briefly on the boy's shoulder. A gentle, steady contact, the touch of someone who was not going to make this worse. "Hi," she said to the boy quietly, crouching slightly so she was at his level. "I'm Evelyn. I've heard you have a fox." The boy looked at her with the frank evaluation of children, still holding Lucien's leg with one hand, the fox extended in the other. "It's mine," he said. "I know," she said. "It's a good one." She straightened. She looked at Lucien. He was looking at her. The nothing on his face had been replaced now with something, not the composure he usually wore, but something underneath the composure, the actual thing that lived there when all the architecture came down. She had wondered for 12 years what that would look like. It looked like a man who had run out of moves. Around them, the room was doing what rooms did when something happened that no one had a protocol for. The uncertain half-silence, the glances, the calculation of whether this was a thing to acknowledge or pretend not to have seen. She was aware of the cameras. There were always cameras at these events. The Foundation's photographer, the Society press, the phones of 400 people who had documented their evenings as a matter of course. She was aware that whatever had just happened in this room was already being recorded in multiple formats and would exist in the world whether anyone wanted it to or not. She looked at Lucien. "I think," she said very quietly, for him alone, "we should take this conversation somewhere private." He said nothing for a moment. She watched him look at the boy, at Vivian, at the room around him. The faces, the cameras, the particular configuration of powerful people who had just witnessed something they would be processing and discussing and using for a very long time. "Yes," he said. His voice was flat, stripped. "Sasha," Evelyn said, not loudly, and Sasha was there within seconds because Sasha had been watching the room all night the way Evelyn had asked her to. "The East Conference Room," Evelyn said. "Please." They moved through the room in a small group. Evelyn, Lucien, Vivian, Ethan with his fox, Sasha opening the door to the corridor. Gerald Pruitt appeared from somewhere near the stage and started toward them, and Evelyn looked at him once, and something in her expression stopped him at 10 feet. The East Conference Room was small and white and lit with the flat overhead light of a working room rather than an event space. A table, 8 chairs, a phone unit on the table, a whiteboard with the ghost of old writing on it. Sasha pulled the door closed behind them, and they were alone. Evelyn, Lucien, Vivian, and a 5-year-old boy who had sat himself in one of the oversized chairs and was quietly walking his fox across the table edge, making small sounds to himself, entirely occupied. For a moment no one spoke. Evelyn set her clutch on the table. She reached into it and took out her phone and placed it on the table face up, the email from Patricia Osei visible on the screen. Lucien looked at the phone. He looked at the email header. His jaw moved once. "How long?" he said. "The morning after the fox fell," she said. He went very still. "The whole time," he said. "Yes." He turned away, walked to the window. There was no view, just the building's exterior wall 2 feet away, but he stood there anyway with his back to the room, one hand on the window frame, and she watched the line of his shoulders do something she had never seen them do in 12 years. "Lucien," Vivian's voice, very quiet. He didn't turn around. "She knows about Margaret Diaz," Vivian said. "She knows about the application. She has the documents. His hand on the window frame tightened. I told her, Vivian said. I told her what I knew. I should have told her a long time ago, and I didn't, and I... Stop, he said. One word, flat. Vivian stopped. He turned from the window. He looked at Evelyn with an expression she had never seen on his face and would not easily forget. Not rage, not the cold, composed anger that she knew, but something rawer, something that had been stripped of its management and was showing its actual shape. What do you want? He said. I want the truth, she said. All of it. On record. Tonight. And if I don't, then the audit findings go to the full board at tomorrow's emergency session. The intake coordinator documentation goes to the AG's office on Monday, and the foundation press release about the program fraud goes out Tuesday morning. She said it the way you said things that you had rehearsed enough times that they had lost their emotional charge. The gala coverage that goes out tonight will already have tonight's footage attached to it. The story writes itself from there. Lucian looked at her for a long time. She looked back. Ethan's fox made a small sound on the edge of the table. The boy said something soft to it, a private word, occupied in the way of children who were blessedly unaware of the temperature of the room they were sitting in. He has your eyes, Evelyn said. She hadn't planned to say it. It came out quiet and without particular emotion, just an observation, and it landed in the room differently than everything else that had been said. Lucian looked at the boy. Something moved across his face that was the closest thing to undisguised feeling she had ever seen there. I know, he said. He didn't deserve any of this, she said. Whatever you did to me, whatever you did to Vivian, he's 5 years old and he doesn't deserve to be the thing that falls apart when you run out of moves. Lucienne was quiet. So here's what's going to happen, Evelyn said. You're going to sit down, you're going to answer my questions, all of them. And then we're going to figure out what comes next in a way that doesn't make that child collateral damage. She pulled out a chair and sat down. She placed her hands flat on the table and looked at him. Her husband of 12 years, the man she had walked into a gallery with 4 weeks ago on his arm. The man she had slept beside through 2 losses and 12 years of careful erosion. And she waited. Vivian sat down. Ethan looked up briefly, then went back to his fox. Lucien stood at the window for another moment. Then he walked to the table and sat down. And somewhere in the ballroom on the other side of the wall, 400 people were being told by the event coordinator that the program would be slightly delayed, and the room was doing what rooms did when things went unexpectedly quiet, filling the space with its own noise, restless and uncertain, waiting for someone to come back out and tell them what had... The room was very small, and the silence in it was the kind that had weight. Lucien sat across from her with his hands on the table. Not folded, not clasped, just flat, the way hands looked when the person they belonged to had stopped performing and had nothing left to perform with. The overhead light caught the gray at his temples, the particular tiredness around his eyes that she had attributed for years to the demands of running an empire and understood now was the tiredness of a man who had been maintaining 2 separate architectures of reality for half a decade and had just watched both of them come down in the same room. Ethan had moved from the chair to the floor. He was sitting cross-legged under the table with his fox, walking it in small circles on the carpet, making a low sound to himself that was not quite a song. The sound of a child who was entirely inside his own world, which was the most merciful thing in the room right now. Evelyn looked at Lucien. Margaret Diaz, she said. His jaw moved. She processed the application. You arranged it. Not a question. He didn't treat it like one. Yes, he said. You knew the income documentation was fraudulent. The documentation reflected a prior period of... Lucien. Her voice was flat. Don't. He stopped. Something moved in his face. He looked down at his hands. Yes, he said. I knew. Vivian made a small sound across the table. Not a word, just air. The departure package, Evelyn said. Margaret Diaz, 4-time standard. Approved through the executive committee. She needed... How much did you pay her to stay quiet? The word quiet landed in the room like something physical. He looked up at her. 40,000, he said, on top of the package. Evelyn absorbed this. She had known the number was going to be something. Knowing hadn't made it easier to hear. Through which entity? She said. A holding company. It's not traceable to the foundation. Everything is traceable, she said. That's what you've never understood about the people who actually do this work. We keep records because the work requires records. Every distribution, every assessment, every intake decision. It's all documented because the families who depend on this program deserve documentation. You use that system and you assume the records would protect you because you control most of the people who can access them. She paused. You don't control all of them. He looked at her for a long moment. How much does Franklin have? He said. Enough. How much, Evelyn? All of it, she said. The qualifying assessment, the income documentation discrepancy, the Diaz departure package, the executive committee approval. The financial trail between the holding company and Diaz's personal account. The full benefit history for CF-2019-0112, cross-referenced against Vivian's actual compensation at the DeMarco Group. She folded her hands on the table. All of it. The silence that followed was different from the one before. Denser. The kind of silence that formed when the last available move had been named and found to be gone. Vivian stood up abruptly. She walked to the corner of the room and stood there with her back to them, one hand pressed against the wall. And Evelyn watched her shoulders move with the effort of breathing steadily. You told me it was handled, Vivian said. Her voice was facing the wall. You said the application was legitimate. You said Ethan qualified. At the time, stop. She turned. Her face was white and very controlled, and something underneath the control was shaking. Don't tell me what the circumstances were. Don't explain it to me. I'm asking you, did you tell me the application was legitimate knowing that it wasn't? Lucien looked at her. Yes, he said. Vivian nodded once, the kind of nod that was an agreement, the kind that meant I needed to hear you say it. She turned back to the wall. The door opened. Gerald Pruitt stepped into the room. He had not knocked. He stood in the doorway with the expression of a man who had made a decision about which side he was on and had arrived to execute it, and he looked at Evelyn with a directness that was the first honest thing she had seen from him all evening. Evelyn, he said, I think we need to talk about how this evening proceeds. There are 400 people in that room, and the longer we stay in here, the more the story writes itself in a direction that damages everyone. Close the door, Gerald, she said. I think... Close the door and sit down or leave and close the door behind you. Those are the options. He looked at Lucien. Lucien said nothing. His hands were still flat on the table, and he was looking at Evelyn with the expression of a man who was recalculating not a strategy, but something more fundamental, the entire premise of the situation he was in. Pruitt came in. He closed the door. He did not sit down. He stood near the door with his hands in his pockets, and the practiced calm of a man who had spent decades in rooms where the temperature ran high. The audit, he said to Evelyn. Whatever you think the findings show, presenting this publicly, tonight, will create a regulatory situation that damages the foundation as much as anyone else. Donor confidence alone. Gerald, she said, I'm going to ask you something directly, and I need a direct answer. He waited. Did Lucien tell you about the audit before I initiated it? A pause of exactly the wrong length. He mentioned you were considering a review, Pruitt said. Did he ask you to manage it? Another pause. He asked me to make sure the scope remained. Did he pay you? She said. The room went very still. Pruitt's jaw tightened. That's because if he paid you to interfere with a board governance process, that's a separate matter from everything else in this room, and it has a separate set of consequences. She looked at him steadily. So I'll ask you once more. Did he compensate you in any form for your involvement in limiting the audit's scope? The silence stretched. Under the table, Ethan's fox made a small sound on the carpet. Pruitt looked at Lucien. Lucien looked at the table. Get out, Gerald, Lucien said. It was very quiet. Not a command with heat behind it, just a flat, exhausted directive. Pruitt looked between them once more. Then he opened the door and walked out and closed it behind him, and the sound of the latch catching was the loudest thing in the room for a moment. Evelyn picked up her phone. She typed a text to Franklin. Pruitt, compensation for scope interference. Need to add to documentation. She set the phone back down. Lucien watched her do this. Who else? He said. What? Who else have you built a case with, besides Franklin? Patricia Osei, she said, and the two board members you didn't buy. He absorbed this. She watched it land, watched him process the full architecture of what she had spent 3 weeks building while she passed him the coffee carafe at breakfast, and said goodnight at appropriate hours, and performed a marriage with the precision of someone who had finally understood what it actually was. You did all of this, he said, while living in the same house. You taught me, she said. You spent 12 years teaching me what it looked like to maintain a surface while running something completely different underneath. I was paying attention, Lucian. I was always paying attention. I just didn't know what I was learning until I needed it. He looked at her for a long time. Something in his face moved. Not remorse exactly, not guilt in any form she recognized, but something adjacent to recognition. The specific expression of a man who was seeing something he had fundamentally miscalculated. The 2 pregnancies, he said. Very quiet. She went very still. When Vivian was pregnant, he said. The first time you lost, he stopped. His hands pressed flat against the table. I was with her when we found out. About Ethan, the same week. The same week. She had known in the abstract that the timelines overlapped. She had done the calculation in the foundation records that first morning, had understood what the dates meant. But understanding a thing mathematically and hearing it spoken aloud in a small white room at 8:15 on the night of the Haven House Bright Tomorrow Gala were completely different experiences, and she discovered this in the space of the next 3 seconds with a clarity that was almost physical. She did not move. She did not look away from him. You sat with me in that hospital, she said. Her voice was entirely level. She was almost surprised by this. You held my hand. You cried. He said nothing. And you already knew, she said. His jaw moved. Something in his throat. Yes. She looked at him for what felt like a very long time, but was probably 4 seconds. Then she picked up her phone and stood up. I'm going back into that ballroom, she said. I'm going to get on that stage. I'm going to present the Foundation's annual report, and I'm going to speak about the work this organization does and the families it supports and the legacy my mother left that you decided to use as a prop for your own purposes. She pushed her chair in. And then tomorrow morning, Franklin is going to be in contact with your attorney, and we are going to begin the process of undoing what you built in my mother's name. Evelyn, I'm not finished. She wasn't raising her voice. She didn't need to. The absence of heat in it was worse than heat would have been. The boy stays out of all of it. Whatever legal process follows, whatever press follows, whatever happens to your company and your reputation and the other parts of your world that are about to have a very difficult few months, he doesn't get touched. He doesn't get named. He doesn't become a story. Do you understand me? Lucien looked at her. Yes, he said. Say it like you mean it, she said, because this is the one thing I will not negotiate and I will not forgive if it gets broken. Something shifted in his face. Underneath all of it, the exhaustion, the stripped-down exposure of a man caught completely. Something that was actually real. He stays out of it, Lucien said. I swear it. She nodded. She picked up her clutch. She looked at Vivian. Vivian was still standing in the corner of the room, and she was looking at Evelyn with an expression that was very hard to name. It had gratitude in it, and guilt, and something else. Something that was the specific look of a woman who had spent 5 years inside a story that had just ended and didn't yet know what came next. Take him home, Evelyn said. Not through the main room. Sasha will show you the side exit. Vivian nodded. She moved to Ethan, crouched down, said something soft to him. The boy looked up. Are we leaving? He said. Yeah, baby. But the party. Different plan tonight, Vivian said. Her voice was steady with the specific steadiness of a mother who was holding something together for her child's sake. We're going to get dinner, just us. Wherever you want. The boy considered this with the gravity of a 5-year-old weighing options. Pizza, he said. Pizza, Vivian said. Let's go. She took his hand. He took the fox. They moved toward the door. At the door, Ethan stopped. He turned and looked at Evelyn with the frank, direct gaze of a child who had not yet learned to look at adults with anything other than his full attention. Bye, he said. Bye, she said. He walked out. The door closed. She stood in the small white room with Lucien for a moment. The sound of the ballroom came through the walls. The ambient noise of 400 people waiting, the low roar of an evening that had been paused and was asking for someone to come back out and resume it. Lucien was looking at the door where his son had just been. "I didn't want him to know it was like this," he said. Very quiet. Not to her specifically, just to the room. She looked at him. She thought about 12 years, about 2 hospital rooms and the tears she had believed, about the wooden fox falling on the kitchen floor at 5:12 in the morning and the particular sound it made on the marble, that small, definitive knock that had cracked everything open. "Then you should have made different choices," she said. She walked to the door. "Evelyn." She stopped. Her hand on the doorframe. She did not turn around. "I'm sorry," he said. "For whatever that—" "I know you are," she said. "Right now in this room, I believe that you are. That's the worst part, Lucien. That's the thing I'm going to have to figure out what to do with." She pushed the door open and walked out into the corridor, and the noise of the ballroom came at her. The voices, the music, the clink of glasses, the ordinary gathered sound of people at an event who did not know that in a small white room 30 feet away, a 12-year marriage had just spoken its last full sentence. Sasha was waiting in the corridor. She took one look at Evelyn's face and said nothing, which was exactly right. "Is she out?" Evelyn said. "Side exit, 2 minutes ago." "Good." She breathed in through her nose, out through her mouth. She rolled her shoulders back once, the physical reset of someone who was about to walk into a room of 400 people and perform the most important public appearance of her professional life. "What's the room like?" "Restless," Sasha said honestly. "Rumors are starting. A few people are checking their phones." "How many cameras have footage from earlier?" "At least 30 phones," Sasha said. "Maybe more. The foundation photographer, I don't know what she got." Evelyn nodded. So it was already out there, already in the air in the uncontained way that things were once they'd been recorded by 30 separate devices in a room full of people who were connected to the world's information networks in real time. By morning it would be everywhere, shaped by whatever narrative got there first. She needed to get there first. "Tell the AV team I'm going to the stage in 4 minutes," she said. "Cut the dinner music. I want the room quiet before I walk out." Sasha relayed it into her headset and nodded. Evelyn looked down at her clutch. She took out her phone. She opened the email from Patricia Osei and read the first 2 paragraphs of the audit summary, not because she needed to, she had read it 6 times, but because she needed to feel the weight of it in her hands, the specific solidity of documented fact. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She stared at it. She answered. "Mrs. DeMarco." A voice she didn't recognize, male, flat, the tone of someone reading from something. "I represent certain parties who have business relationships with your husband. We've become aware of the situation this evening, and we want you to know that we have no interest in the foundation matter. Our interest is in stability. We're asking that whatever you present tonight be limited in scope, focused on the personal rather than the institutional." She stood very still in the corridor. "Certain parties," she said. "That's correct." "I see." She looked at the wall, at the institutional cream paint of a hotel corridor at 8:20 on a Thursday evening. "And what happens if the scope isn't limited?" A pause. "We would prefer not to have that conversation," the voice said. Her heart was hitting her ribs. She could feel it very clearly. The precise physical fact of her own heartbeat, the acceleration of it, the way her body had registered the meaning of that sentence before her mind had fully processed it. This was the part of Lucien's world she had always chosen not to examine. The part that existed below the holding companies and the board meetings and the black tie galas, the part that made the word stability mean something different from how it sounded. She had known it existed. She had made the calculation, 27 years old, that the life and the man were worth the things she wouldn't look at. She was 39 now. "Tell the parties you represent," she said, and her voice was steady in a way that cost her something she could feel precisely, "that I am a woman standing in a hotel corridor about to walk into a room and speak about my mother's work, and there is no version of this conversation that changes what I'm about to do." The line was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. DeMarco." "Don't call this number again," she said. She ended the call. She stood in the corridor for 3 seconds. Her hand was shaking. She looked at it, the actual physical tremor of it, the thing her body was doing without asking her. And she made a fist and held it, and breathed until the shaking stopped. Sasha was looking at her. 4 minutes, Evelyn said. Yes, Sasha said. She unclenched her hand. She smoothed the front of her dress. She looked at the door at the end of the corridor that opened onto the stage wing of the Whitmore Grand's main ballroom, behind which 400 people were waiting in a room that had been holding its breath since a 5-year-old boy in a blue blazer had run across the floor and said a word that changed everything. She thought about her mother, about Margaret Ashcroft building something from nothing, doing it quietly and without performance, doing it because the work was the work, and the work mattered, and that was the only reason anything was ever worth doing. She thought about Ethan Cross eating pizza somewhere in this city right now, walking his fox across a restaurant table. She thought about this voice on the phone, about certain parties, about the particular cold of a threat delivered in the flat professional tone of someone who made such calls regularly. She thought about what it meant to be afraid and do the thing anyway, which was the only definition of courage that had ever made sense to her. The AV team cut the music. She heard the room go quiet on the other side of the door, 400 people registering the silence, turning toward the stage, waiting. Sasha opened the door. The light came at her first, the stage light, bright and flat and total, the kind that erased everything outside its radius and left only the person standing in it. She walked into it. She heard the room react to her presence. Not applause yet, something more complicated. The collective intake of people who had been wading through something they didn't fully understand and were now being given the person they needed to make sense of it. She walked to the podium. She put her hands on either side of it. She looked out at the room. The 400 faces, the cameras, the circular tables with their centerpieces and their half-finished dinner plates and their glasses of wine, the faces of donors and politicians and journalists, and the particular faces of people from certain parts of New York's power structure who were watching her with an attention that had nothing casual in it. She looked at all of them. She found Lucien near the back of the room. He had come out of the corridor. He was standing at the edge of the space, not at his table, just standing there at the margin of the room with his hands at his sides and his face carrying the expression she had last seen in the small white room. Stripped, exposed, the face of a man who had run completely out of moves and was now simply watching to see what happened next. She looked at him for 1 second, then she looked back at the room. She opened her mouth, and from somewhere near the back, a phone screen lit up, and then another, and then the sound started. The particular rising murmur of 400 people receiving the same information simultaneously, the murmur of a room discovering that the footage from earlier in the evening had just... The murmur spread through the room like water finding its level. Not loud, not panicked, but inexorable. The sound of 400 people absorbing the same information through their palms, the footage moving from phone to phone in the particular way that things move now, instant and permanent and impossible to contain once released. Evelyn stood at the podium and watched it happen. She had maybe 30 seconds before the room tipped from murmur to chaos. She could feel the tipping point the way you felt weather coming, the pressure change, the shift in the air, the moment before. She had walked to this podium intending to speak about the Foundation's annual report and her mother's legacy, and the specific documented fraud that had been committed in that legacy's name. She had walked out here with a plan and a sequence and the full architecture of 3 weeks of careful preparation behind her. The footage had changed the sequence. She gripped the podium. She thought, you either control this room or the room controls you. Those are the options. Pick one. She leaned into the microphone. I need everyone's attention, she said. Her voice came through the speakers at a volume that cut the murmur cleanly. Not loud, precise. The particular frequency of a human voice that expects to be listened to and has earned that expectation, and the room responded to it the way rooms responded to that quality, the conversations dying table by table, the phones lowering, the 400 faces turning toward the stage. She looked at them. All of them. Most of you, she said, have just seen something on your phones, a video from earlier this evening, taken in this room. A child running across this floor, a moment that was not planned and was not staged, and was not part of the program you received when you walked in tonight. She paused. Let it sit. I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen. I'm not going to ask you to disregard it or wait for a statement from a publicist. What I'm going to do is tell you what it means. And I'm going to ask you to listen, because what it means is directly connected to the work this foundation does and the integrity of that work, and you deserve to know. The room was completely still now, the kind of still that meant 400 people were holding their breath in the same moment. She took her hands off the podium. She stood without holding on to anything. "My name is Evelyn Ashcroft DeMarco," she said. "My mother founded Haven House 22 years ago with $12,000 and a rented room in a building that doesn't exist anymore because she believed that families in crisis deserved more than a waiting list and a pamphlet. She spent the last decade of her life building it into something real. I have spent the 6 years since her death trying to be worthy of what she built." She paused. "Tonight I have to tell you that the Family Assistance Program, the program that puts handmade toys in the hands of children who have very little, that provides housing support and childcare access and medical referrals to families in verified need, that program was used fraudulently. A qualifying assessment was falsified. A foundation employee was induced to process the fraudulent application and then paid to leave. The authorization for that payment came from the executive committee of this foundation's board, chaired by my husband." Not a sound in the room. "The audit documenting these findings was completed this week," she said. "The full report will be provided to the board, to our outside counsel, and to the appropriate regulatory bodies beginning tomorrow morning. Every family currently receiving support through the program has been individually verified as legitimately qualifying. Their benefits are not affected. The program continues." She looked across the room. "What does not continue is the arrangement that allowed this foundation's resources to be treated as a private instrument by the people who were supposed to protect it." She reached into her clutch. She took out her phone. She set it on the podium face up, the audit summary visible on the screen, a gesture that meant, "It exists, it's real, it's here." "I know some of you came tonight for a gala," she said. "I know some of you came because the DeMarco name on the invitation meant something to you. About access, about relationships, about the particular value of being in certain rooms with certain people. I understand that. I have spent 12 years understanding that." She looked at the room. "What I'm asking you to consider is what this foundation's name means to you. My mother's name, the work, the actual families. Because that's what's being decided right now in this room. Not by me, not by my husband, but by every person sitting at these tables who will make choices in the next weeks and months about what they stand behind." She looked toward the back of the room. Lucien was still standing at the edge of the space. He hadn't moved. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't read from the stage. She was too far away, the light too different. But his posture had the particular quality of a man who was not going to make a scene, who had understood, somewhere in the last hour, that the scene had already happened, and that everything from here was consequence. She looked away from him. "The Bright Tomorrow Gala will continue this evening," she said. "The silent auction is open. The foundation's work continues. If you have questions about what I've told you tonight, I will answer them, not through a representative, directly." She picked up her phone. "Thank you for listening." She stepped back from the podium. The room held its breath for one more second. Then someone began to clap. A single pair of hands, somewhere in the middle of the room, a woman Evelyn didn't immediately recognize. And then another pair joined it, and then another, and it moved through the room, not like an ovation, but like something more honest than that. The sound of people who had just witnessed something they hadn't expected and were responding to it with the instinctive recognition of a truth told plainly. Evelyn walked off the stage. Sasha was waiting in the wing with a glass of water and the expression of someone who had just watched something they would remember. Evelyn took the water. She drank half of it. Her hands were not shaking anymore. They had stopped shaking somewhere in the middle of the speech, somewhere around the moment she took them off the podium and stood without holding on to anything, and they had not shaken since. "Franklin is outside," Sasha said. "He came in during the speech." "Tell him I'll be out in 5 minutes." Sasha nodded and moved away. Evelyn stood in the wing. She could hear the room reassembling itself on the other side of the scrim, the conversations beginning again, quieter than before, the particular sound of people processing something significant. She heard her own name moving through it in waves. She heard Lucien's name. She heard Haven House. She heard the word fraud spoken plainly by a voice she didn't recognize and felt the specific sting of it. Not because it was wrong, but because it was true, and it was her foundation, and it would take time to separate the institution from what had been done to it. Time. She had time. That was the thing about the next chapter. It was made of time, and she had it. She finished the water. She straightened her dress. She walked out. The next 6 months were not clean or simple or organized into the kind of narrative that had a clear shape from the outside. Later, when people asked Evelyn about that period, and people asked because the story had moved through the city's consciousness in the way that certain stories did, reshaping the understanding of things that had seemed fixed, she would say that it was the most demanding work she had ever done, and also the most clarifying, and that she was not sure those two things were unrelated. Franklin filed the formal documentation with the Attorney General's office on the Friday morning after the gala. The Haven House Board convened an emergency session the following Tuesday. Gerald Pruitt resigned before the session began. The two members Evelyn had briefed seconded the formal censure motion. The outside audit firm that Patricia Ossie brought in completed their independent review 6 weeks later and confirmed every finding. The DeMarco Group's board of directors called an emergency meeting of their own the week after the gala. Lucien attended it. He came out of it without his chairmanship, which he had not resigned, but which had been restructured around him in the way that boards restructured around men who had become liabilities, carefully, with the full vocabulary of corporate governance applied to what was essentially an amputation. The company continued. It was a significant company with significant assets, and it had been built over a long enough period that it had institutional resilience independent of any individual, which was either a comfort or an irony depending on how you thought about it. The other parts of his world, the parts that operated below the holding companies, those Evelyn did not follow closely. She knew, from Franklin, that certain relationships had been severed, that the particular stability that the anonymous phone call had invoked was a stability that Lucien could no longer guarantee, which had its own consequences in the communities where stability of that kind was currency. She did not inquire into the specifics. She had spent 12 years not inquiring into the specifics, and she understood now that this had been a choice and that choices had prices, and she was paying hers. The divorce was finalized in November. It took 4 months, which was faster than most people expected, and slower than it felt from the inside. Franklin handled it with the meticulous care of a man who had known Evelyn since she was born and was determined that she would leave this marriage with everything that was hers protected. She did. The estate, the foundation directorship, the properties her mother had left her, all of it remained intact. Lucien did not contest it. She had expected him to contest at least part of it, had prepared for it, and when he didn't, she sat with the fact of it for a while, trying to understand it. She asked Franklin about it once. Why didn't he fight it? Franklin had looked at her over his reading glasses. I think, he said carefully, that he understood there was nothing left to fight for. Not in the way he would have needed to fight. She thought about that for a while. She thought it probably meant that losing her, actually losing her, the legal finality of it, was the only thing he could do at this point that looked like a choice rather than a defeat. And Lucien DeMarco, whatever else he was, had always needed things to look like choices. She didn't say this to Franklin. She filed it in the category of things she understood about her ex-husband that she would spend years unknotting from her understanding of herself. The nursery had been closed for 3 years when she finally opened it. It was on the 3rd floor of the house. She had kept the house was hers, a room she had not entered since the second pregnancy ended, and she had come home from the hospital and closed the door and not gone back. Lucien had suggested more than once over the years that they do something with it. She had always said she would get to it. She never had. She opened it on a Saturday morning in December, 4 weeks after the divorce was finalized. She stood in the doorway for a while first. The room smelled like dust and the faint ghost of the paint they had chosen, a soft gray-green, the color of something living, which they had picked out together in a hardware store on a Sunday afternoon when hope was still a reasonable posture. She went in. She had a contractor come the following week. She sat with him at the kitchen table and explained what she wanted. The walls opened up. The built-in shelving her father had installed when the house was first bought. The good window light maximized. A work table long enough for 6 children to sit at side by side. She wanted it simple and durable and oriented toward use. What kind of use? the contractor asked. Children making things, she said. Art, woodworking, whatever they need space to build. He wrote it down. He came back 3 weeks later with a team, and they worked for 10 days, and when they were done, Evelyn stood in the doorway of what had been a closed room for 3 years and looked at what it had become. She called it Margaret's workshop. She had a small sign made, not a plaque, just wood and paint, something a child could have made, and she hung it on the door herself with a hammer and 2 nails on a Tuesday morning in January while the city was cold and bright outside the window. Haven House began using it the following week. She had arranged it with the Foundation's Family Services Coordinator. A rotating schedule, small groups, 2 afternoons a week, children from the residential program who were staying at the Haven House transitional housing a few blocks away. A local woodworker named Dale, who was 64 and had the particular patience of someone who had spent a lifetime working with material that required it, came on Tuesdays. A ceramics teacher named Yolanda came on Thursdays. The first afternoon, Evelyn stayed. She wasn't sure why. She had told herself she would introduce the space and then leave it to the staff, that it wasn't hers to hover over, but she stayed, sitting in the corner with a cup of coffee, watching 6 children between the ages of 4 and 9 discover the workshop. She watched them touch things first, the way children touch new spaces. Tentatively, then with more confidence. Then, with the specific absorption of a person who had found a place where the rules were clear and the material was real, and the thing you made was yours. She thought about her mother, about what it had looked like when Margaret Ashcroft sat in a room with people who needed something and tried to figure out what she could actually give them, about the difference between giving what was needed and giving what looked good from the outside. She drank her coffee. She watched a 4-year-old girl make a catastrophic and beautiful mess with blue paint. She felt something in her chest that was not quite happiness and not quite grief, but lived in the territory between them, the place where things that had cost you something became, slowly and without announcement, the things that mattered most. Vivian Cross brought Ethan to the workshop for the first time in February. Evelyn had not arranged it. Vivian had called the Foundation's Family Services Coordinator, learned about the program, and registered Ethan through the normal intake process, which was, Evelyn noted when she saw the registration, completed with full and accurate documentation. She had not told Evelyn in advance. She found out when she arrived at the workshop on a Thursday afternoon and saw a small boy in a green sweater at the work table with Yolanda, very seriously attempting to center a ball of clay. She stood in the doorway for a moment. Ethan looked up. He had the particular focus of a child interrupted mid-concentration, slightly annoyed at whoever had disturbed it. He looked at her. His face did the calculation that children's faces did, the recognition, the filing, the decision about what to do with it. "Hi," he said. "Hi," she said. He went back to his clay. Vivian was standing near the window, the careful posture of a woman who was not sure of her welcome and was not going to assume it. She looked at Evelyn. There was a question in her face that she did not put into words. Evelyn walked to the window. "He's good at that," Evelyn said, looking at Ethan with the clay. "He's good at anything that requires his hands," Vivian said. "He gets that from—" She stopped. Evelyn looked at her. "It's all right," Evelyn said. Vivian was quiet for a moment. She was looking at her son. "I got a job," she said. "A different one. Corporate administration, smaller company, less money, but—" She paused. "Different." "Good," Evelyn said. "We moved," Vivian said. "Different apartment, different neighborhood. Ethan's in a new school. He made a friend the first week, which is—" Something moved in her face. "He's adaptable. He doesn't know yet what that costs." Evelyn looked at the boy. His tongue was pressed between his teeth with the effort of the clay. He had gotten it reasonably round. "He doesn't need to know yet," Evelyn said. They stood at the window for a while without speaking, which was a kind of conversation that required 12 years of living through something to be capable of, and both of them had done that living through something, in their different proximities to the same man, and the silence between them held all of that without needing to name it. "Lucien asked to see Ethan last month," Vivian said finally. Evelyn waited. "I said not yet," Vivian said. "I said Ethan needed time to understand things better, that it had to happen on Ethan's terms, not his." "That sounds right," Evelyn said. He accepted it, Vivian said, which surprised me. She paused. He didn't negotiate, he just said okay. Evelyn thought about Lucian, about what okay meant from a man who had spent his entire adult life negotiating everything. She thought that it might mean something. She thought it might not. She thought that Vivian would navigate it the way mothers navigated everything, imperfectly, with the information she had, trying to protect the child from the weight of what the adults had done. "I'll never be able to give you back the things he took from you," Vivian said, very quiet, looking at the window. "The years where you thought he was grieving with you, the foundation, the way you must have felt when you realized." "No," Evelyn said. "You can't give those back." "I know." "That's not what I need from you," Evelyn said. Vivian looked at her, "What I need from you," Evelyn said, "is for him to grow up knowing what honesty looks like. That's it. That's the only thing that matters now." Vivian held her gaze for a moment. Her eyes were bright with something she was not going to let become tears in this room, and Evelyn respected her for it. "I can do that," Vivian said. Ethan had abandoned the clay and was now standing at the shelves looking at the tools, his small face moving through the inventory with the systematic attention of a child who wanted to understand what everything was for. "He's going to ask about the fox," Vivian said. "He still has it. He sleeps with it. He's going to ask at some point why he has it and what it means, and I don't know yet what I'm going to tell him." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. She thought about a morning at 5:12, standing in an amber-lit kitchen in bare feet, watching a small carved thing fall out of a coat pocket and hit marble floor. She thought about how she had crouched down and picked it up and turned it over and read the number burned into its base. She thought about all the threads that had run from that number outward, through database records and financial documents, and a woman's departure package, and a conference room in a hotel, and a speech delivered without holding on to the podium. She thought about what it meant that the beginning of the end had been a child's toy, that the thing which had cracked open 12 years of careful surface had been something made by hand for a specific child, something that someone had spent real time on, something that carried the weight of intention in every curve. "Tell him it came from a program that a woman built," Evelyn said, "a program that was supposed to help families. Tell him that the people who ran it made mistakes, but the work itself was real. Tell him that the fox was made by someone who cared about getting it right." She paused. "When he's old enough, tell him the whole thing. All of it. Because he deserves to know the truth of where he comes from, even the parts that are hard." Vivian was very still. "Tell him that the woman whose name is on the program," Evelyn said, "hopes he makes good use of the workshop." She looked at Ethan. The boy had found a small hand plane on the lower shelf and was looking at it with the intense focus of someone encountering a new kind of object. Yolanda was beside him now, explaining something, showing him how to hold it properly, and his hands adjusted around the tool with the quick instinctive correctness of a child who is naturally good with his hands. She watched him for a moment, his particular small gravity, the way he concentrated. Then she finished her coffee and set the cup on the windowsill. "I have a meeting at 4, she said to Vivian. "Of course," Vivian said. She crossed the workshop to the door. At the door she paused and looked back once, at the room, at the long work table, at the shelves of tools and the window light and the 6 children distributed through the space doing the serious and necessary work of making things, and at a small boy with a hand plane learning the angle that made it work. She thought about her mother, about the $12,000 and the rented room, about building something from nothing because the work was the work and the work mattered, and that was the only reason. She thought, "Margaret, I'm trying." She walked out. The city was cold and specific in the way it was in January. The light low and pale, the air with that particular sharpness that made everything look slightly more real than usual, the edges of buildings and people and yellow cabs more defined against the gray sky. She walked 2 blocks before she stopped and stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Just stood there, her coat pulled against the cold, watching the ordinary traffic of the afternoon move around her. She thought about what the next year looked like. The Foundation's restructured board, which she now chaired independently. The ongoing regulatory review, which Patricia Osei was navigating with the methodical confidence of someone who believed the documentation would hold, and it would. The 2 afternoons a week in the workshop. The donor relationships she would have to rebuild. The ones that had been attached to Lucian's name, and had receded when that name became complicated. And the ones that had stayed, and some had stayed, she had been surprised by how many had stayed. People who had written to say they believed in the work and were not leaving. She thought about what healing looked like when it didn't announce itself. When it just showed up on a Thursday afternoon as a small boy with good hands learning to use a tool. She had not cried since the night of the gala. She had expected to cry eventually. Some delayed reckoning, some moment in the dark, when everything she had held together under pressure finally came apart. But it hadn't come. What had come instead was work, and sleep, and coffee in the morning in a kitchen that was hers alone, and the specific satisfaction of decisions made clearly with full information rather than the partial vision of someone choosing not to look too closely. She thought that maybe this was what the other side of grief felt like when you moved through it without ceremony. Not healed, not closed, not resolved into something clean, just ongoing. Just the next thing, and then the next thing, and the work in front of you that needed doing. She started walking again. 3 blocks on, her phone buzzed. Franklin Marsh. Patricia got the preliminary response from the AG's office, he said when she answered. They're moving forward. Good, she said. It's going to be a long process, he said. Discovery alone. I know. Are you all right? She considered the question. She was on a sidewalk in January with the city moving around her, and she had just left a room where a child was learning the angle that made a handplane work. And ahead of her, the afternoon was cold and specific, and full of the ordinary things that the next chapter was made of. Yes, she said, I think so. Good, he said. Then let's work. Let's work, she said. She put the phone in her pocket and kept walking. The city did what it did, indifferent and relentless and beautiful in its indifference. And she moved through it with her hands in her pockets and her shoulders level and her eyes forward, a woman who had lost a great deal and had not, in the losing, lost herself, and who was still here, still moving, still carrying the work forward into whatever came next. The wooden fox was on her desk when she got home. She had placed it there 2 weeks ago. She had asked Vivian about it, and Vivian had said Ethan would want her to have the original one, that he understood in the way children understood things through what they were told rather than what they could reason, that it belonged to the place it had come from. She had set it on the corner of her desk where she could see it from wherever she was sitting. It was small and reddish and very precisely made. The white-tipped ears, the brush of gold along the tail. The work of a craftsman who had cared about getting it right. She sat down at her desk. She opened her laptop. She pulled up the Foundation's donor correspondence file and began to work. Outside the window, the city was going dark in the gradual way of January afternoons. The light draining out of the sky from the top down, the buildings holding their shapes against the dusk. She worked through it, the fox in the corner of her vision, and the room grew dim around her, and she turned on the desk lamp and kept going. And the night came in the way nights came, quietly and without asking permission, and she was still there when it arrived.